Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are literally pulling back the curtain on the invisible psychological forces that dictate what we do. We're talking about the actual architecture of behavior, how we learn. And let's explore this together, because wrapping your head around these underlying mechanisms, it's a real game changer for how you view your own daily habits, your fears, and your everyday choices.
Okay, right off the bat, do me a favor. Just imagine a giant plate of really sour, tangy mango pickles right in front of you. Seriously, picture it. Is your mouth watering a little bit? Chances are you're experiencing some salivation right now just from the thought. And that brilliantly proves the core premise of this entire explainer before we even throw a textbook definition at you. Your body is physically reacting to an experience you've had in the past. But what exactly do psychologists mean when they use the word learning?
Well, the psychological definition is surprisingly precise. Learning is defined as any relatively permanent change in behavior or behavioral potential produced by experience. Now, the absolutely crucial phrase there is relatively permanent. If you're reading a book and you start to lose focus just because you're tired, that's not learning, right? That's just physical fatigue. Or say there's a super loud wedding happening right next door. At first, the noise drives you completely crazy, but a few hours later, you barely notice it. That's actually a temporary physiological adjustment called habituation. It goes away. True learning, on the other hand, leaves a lasting mark. It preserves the past to guide our future.
All right, let's get into our first section, classical conditioning, the reflex.
The story here starts with Ivan Pavlov. He was actually studying digestion when he made this completely happy accident. He noticed his lab dog started salivating before their food even arrived. No way, right? So, to test this, he designed a brilliant setup where the dog was secured in a harness. He even surgically inserted a tube into the dog's jaw, which led to a measuring glass to perfectly track the saliva. In the experiment, Pavlov would sound a bell and then immediately serve meat powder. Over several days, the dog learned to associate that ringing bell with the food. Eventually, Pavlov just rang the bell and presented zero food, but the dog's mouth watered anyway. The dog had acquired a completely new, learned reflex.
So, the really brilliant takeaway here is exactly how a totally neutral signal transforms into a powerful trigger. Let's walk through the breakdown. Before conditioning, the food is what we call an unconditioned stimulus. It naturally causes salivation, the unconditioned response. The bell? It means nothing. But during conditioning, you pair the bell and the food together. Finally, after conditioning, the bell stands all on its own. It's become a conditioned stimulus, and that salivation is now a conditioned response. This is classic stimulus-stimulus, or SS learning. One thing literally just becomes a signal that another is coming.
And this is not just about dogs in labs. We see this all the time in our everyday lives. Have you ever been totally stuffed from dinner, but then you spot a sweet dish at the next table, and suddenly your mouth waters and you miraculously have room for dessert? Yep, that's a conditioned response. Or think about kids. A child naturally fears a loud pop. If a toddler is holding an inflated balloon and it suddenly bursts, they get terrified. Next time you hand them an inflated balloon, they might wince or start crying. The balloon itself became a conditioned stimulus for fear.
Okay, shifting gears, let's move into operant conditioning, the choice.
Pioneered by B.F. Skinner, this paradigm looks at how we actively operate on our environment through voluntary choices. To study this, Skinner used what became known as the Skinner box. Basically, a hungry rat is placed inside this specially built chamber. It's moving around, sniffing, pawing at the walls, just normal exploratory behavior. Then, purely by accident, it presses a lever inside the box. Click! A food pellet drops onto a plate. The rat eats it, goes back to wandering, accidentally hits the lever again, and gets another pellet. You can guess what happens next. The rat connects the dots extremely fast. The random exploring completely stops, and the rat just starts pressing the lever on purpose. Getting that food is the exact consequence that reinforces the voluntary lever-pressing behavior. And that brings us to a massively important concept: reinforcement. A reinforcer is literally any event that increases the probability of a response. But there are two types, and honestly, people get these confused all the time. Positive reinforcement is adding something pleasant, like the rat getting food or you getting a bonus at work. It satisfies a need. Negative reinforcement, though, is about removing something painful or unpleasant. And I cannot stress this enough. Negative reinforcement is not punishment. Punishment tries to suppress a behavior. Negative reinforcement actually strengthens a behavior by letting you escape or avoid something bad.
We actually use operant behaviors every single day as little instruments to reach our goals. Imagine a kid who's obsessed with sweets.
Mom moves the sweet jar, so the child learns to hunt all over the kitchen to find it. Locating the sweets positively reinforces that hunting behavior. Or we learn to say please because it gets us a favor. And remember that negative reinforcement we literally just talked about? When you hop in your car and buckle your seatbelt just to stop that incredibly annoying beeping sound or to avoid injury, that is negative reinforcement in action. You're actively doing something to escape a negative consequence.
Let's just pause and draw a strict contrast here, so you never confuse these big two paradigms. With classical conditioning, the organism is completely passive. The responses are automatic reflexes elicited by a stimulus. But with operant conditioning, the organism is active. The responses are voluntary, emitted by the organism to manipulate the environment. Think of it this way. In classical, the stimulus controls you. In operant, your actions control the outcome.
Which brings us nicely to Section 3, the rules of the game.
These learned behaviors actually follow a very specific life cycle. Step 1 is acquisition. That's where the behavior is learned and reaches its peak strength because of continuous reinforcement. But what happens if the rewards just stop? If the rat keeps pressing the lever and no food comes out, the behavior weakens and eventually disappears. That is Step 2, extinction. But here is the crazy part. Let's some time lapse. That's Step 3. If we put that same rat back in that exact same situation later, the extinguished behavior often suddenly reappears out of nowhere. That's Step 4, spontaneous recovery. It proves the learning wasn't deleted from the brain. It was just sitting there dormant.
Two other really vital rules here are generalization and discrimination. Generalization is when we apply a learned response to a totally new but similar stimulus. Going back to the sweets jar, if a child learns it's on a low shelf and mom moves the sweets to a higher shelf in a different jar, the child is still going to look for it. They generalize the rule. Discrimination is the exact opposite. It's about differentiating between stimuli. Say a child is conditioned to fear a stranger with a long mustache wearing black clothes. If they see another man in black with a beard, their fear generalizes. But if they see a clean-shaven stranger in gray clothes, they don't show any fear at all. They've successfully discriminated between the two.
Moving into our final section, helplessness and observation. Let's slow down for a second, because we really need to dive into some of the heavier, highly relevant applications of these mechanisms. Seligman and Meyer conducted a really profound, if heartbreaking, study on dogs. First, using classical conditioning, they exposed dogs to an electric shock that the dogs had absolutely zero way to escape. Later, they moved those exact same dogs into an operant conditioning setup where they could easily escape the shock just by pressing a panel. But tragically, the dogs didn't even try, they just endured the pain. Because they had experienced inescapable pain previously, they essentially learned to be helpless. And this phenomenon translates directly to humans. Persistent inescapable failure can lead us to simply give up. It's a state of learned helplessness that actually underlies many psychological cases of clinical depression. It is a stark reminder of just how deeply our experiences wire us.
But, we don't just learn from direct rewards or painful shocks, we also learn socially. This brings us to observational learning, which was pioneered by Albert Bandura. This is all about acquiring new behaviors simply by watching other people and emulating them, also known as modeling. Just think about it for a second. Why do you dress the way you do? Fashion designers constantly use tall, confident models because they know we'll unconsciously observe them, associate them with success or beauty, and then emulate their clothing choices. We are constantly silently downloading behaviors from the people we watch. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final kind of provocative thought to chew on today. Look at the people you spend the most time with. Look at the media you consume, the influencers you follow. Who are you observing and what are they teaching you without you even realizing it? Your behavior is basically an architecture, built brick by brick through reflexes, choices, and observation. So I challenge you to become the conscious architect of your own learning. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. Keep exploring and definitely keep questioning the world around you.